Welcome to another episode of Grief Talk. Everything you want to know about grief and more. I'm your host, Vaughn Solis. As an author, mentor, and bereaved mom since 2005, through guest interviews and coaching, here's where you'll always get great content that is inspiring and practical to help you heal after loss. Today's guest is Nick Shaw. Nick is an accomplished executive coach, author, and speaker known for his profound insights into personal transformation, self-discovery, and authentic leadership. With the 2023 release of his debut book, My Teacher, My Son, Lessons on Life, Loss, and Love, Nick shares a compelling narrative about his experience losing his son William at just 9 years old. He offers a thought-provoking and supportive guide to help readers and audiences alike who hear Nick speak embrace a more fulfilling and purposeful existence. Okay, so welcome to the show, Nick. It is an absolute honor to have you here.
Thank you, Vaughn. It's an honor to be here.
So for the audience, just as a reminder, Nick has his first book, I believe it is, Nick, My Teacher, My Son, Lessons on Life, Loss, and Love. As I explained in the intro, Nick did lose his son William at 9 years old in a skiing accident. And Nick, let's just get right to it. I'm filled with questions for you today, but if you'd like to share anything you'd like with the audience about your loss, and this is, to help other bereaved parents who may be going through something similar, just how that happened, how that has impacted you, and basically led you to write your first book and do the work you're doing.
Absolutely happy to share. So, yeah, as Vaughn mentioned, I almost 5 years ago now. At the time, my oldest son William was 9 years old. We were on a ski vacation to Big Sky, Montana, and had a tragic and really fluke and tragic ski accident, and he died. I mean, I guess there's no other way to say it.
Yeah.
As you can all imagine, for those of you who've experienced this, the places you go when something like this happens to you, particularly when you lose a child. Mm-hmm. And in those early days after the accident, and as I was starting to go through my own process of grief, this phrase, my teacher, my son, just came to me. And I was reflecting on William and the impact he'd had on me. And I realized he'd been teaching me since the day he was born. And really, at his birth, during his life, and even in his death, there were lessons I could learn from it. Mm-hmm. And that's when I really had this intense need to try to make meaning out of something that seemed so random and senseless. Mm-hmm. And so that started a journey for me to really try to process what happened, to learn from it so I could live my life differently. Mm-hmm. And my process of grief, that was the way I kind of went about it. And through that, through my learnings, to all the things I reflected on, what culminated was this book.
Yeah. You know what? I feel like I'm talking to me. I literally went through the same thing. And, maybe there was something within you. I know for me, when I lost Janaea in 2005 to suicide, I immediately, there was no question I was going to do some purpose work related to it. And it did translate into my first book, Divine Healing, over a 5-year period. And I've just never looked back. So for you, do you think there was something sort of intrinsic in you that was sort of, and I'm just going to say this the most respectful way I can, not let this loss, certainly respect it, certainly be in the pain, certainly be in the grief, certainly be in the sorrow and the tragedy and the shock and all of that, but at the core, at some point, maybe even for to honor William, that you weren't going to let it destroy you. Fine line there, and I've worked with that for years, so I just wonder if it's intrinsic in us, because not everybody, and we're going to be talking about this a bit in the episode, not everybody can arrive at that place, sometimes years and years and years and years later. But the healing allows us to be exactly what your book is all about and what you're talking about. Is it intrinsic in us that we allow ourselves to find this more wholesome place so we don't let it rob us of our life, the tragedy?
Yes, I absolutely think it's intrinsic within us, because I think for all of us, our instinct is to live our lives, right? We only have one that we know about. And so I think all of us want to live as meaningful and purposeful and happy lives as possible. So it is within us. I think the challenge for some, when they go through experiences like you and I have gone through, it's can you get there? Can you find that place within yourself to go there?
Yeah.
For me, I think I came up with so I don't know why, but like I had all these sort of phrases or mantras come to me in sort of the weeks and months after William died. But another one that sort of hit me was, what would Willie want?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's an obvious thing for people to think about if you haven't lost someone. But when someone that you love dies, and particularly, it doesn't matter if it's a child or a parent, whoever, there's this notion of how can we live our lives in a way that would honor theirs, right? And that's where that mantra came to me. Like, what would Willie want me to do? Would he want me to hurt myself? Would he want me to do things that would harm the remaining members of the family? No, absolutely not. He would want his death and his life to be for nothing. And so that for me was sort of the thing that motivated and pushed me to try to find a way through this thing. And again, this notion of honoring those who have left us, it's not often something we think about, but I'm pretty sure, I'm positive William would not have wanted our family to fall apart. A brother to be more hurt by what happened. So absolutely, we have to think about their honors for us. How we.
Yeah. Because you've written this book and you speak very publicly about William and your experience of loss and so on, do you talk about William frequently within your family?
Absolutely. I think we talk about it all the time. I think in a bygone era, the way people dealt with grief was to perhaps sweep it under the rug or just not talk about it. I think we're in a different time in the history of humanity. But he still is very much a part of our lives. We talk about him, celebrate him. We have a series of different traditions now that we've adopted to try to remember him. It's important for my middle son, Kai. Right. Him, even in the earliest moments after the accident, his inclination was to try to connect with William however he could. And now for us, that was tough at first for my wife and I, but he just wanted to connect with him. He wanted to see pictures of him. He wanted to talk to him. So we had to find a way to do that, to model for him that it's okay to do that. So the earliest moments, we decided we would talk about him because he's still a part of our family. The other thing that is maybe interesting about our story is that a year and a half after William died, we had another son, Bodhi. And we decided to try to have another child because we wanted Kai to have a sibling, and we wanted our family not to replace William, but to feel more whole. We felt imbalanced, excuse me.
Yeah.
And we need to have Bodhi know about his big brother, right? And so the way to do that is to talk about him and to share stories.
That's beautiful. That's so beautiful. And I'm really happy for you that you were able to have another son. And I completely understand you don't replace the child. For those of you, Nick, and audience that are able to have another child, I wasn't in that position. So I lost my only daughter. I do have a surviving son. And he's now 31. And, so we're going back. My daughter would be 40. So we're going back a few years because she died at age 22. But that was a lot to deal with. So I don't know. I can't speak to if another baby or a grandchild helps you heal that wound quicker. I'm not sure. I've read yes, and it just depends. But the point I want to make here is we have to find and cling, and Nick, I'll let you speak to this, whatever we can to that will ignite and then keep that spark going and then turn into a flame and eventually, hopefully, a fire within us to burn bright. And we don't have to go on stage with all these messages, but for those of us that are led to do that and speak publicly and share, because it does take a huge amount of courage and vulnerability to do this. And we're going to talk a little bit about vulnerability in a minute. But I want to move to this chapter 6 you have in your book on love. And we will be having a link to your book, Nick. You say that a life cut short is a stark reminder of our mortality, but allows for love to emerge. And building on this idea of the spark the flame, the fire. What would you like to say about that to help others who are sort of stuck in the darkness, or maybe just very new in their grief with child loss or some other type of tragic loss?
Yeah. So that chapter. So in my book, there's a series of poems. That's the first poem I actually wrote. So
Beautiful.
The love that I experienced in losing William was not something I'd ever experienced before. In that way, I experienced love with my family, that notion. But we were embraced by our community. We live in a small rural Massachusetts town, and the town literally enveloped us.
Nice.
And we're a small town, 5,000 people. Where literally the focal point of the town is the school. And so when a town like that loses a child, it's and I say this in the book. It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to mourn one. And I felt that in a very real way. And I was so touched by the humanity that could emerge, even in our darkest hours, because that's the emotion that comes about. It's real. It's human. It's visceral, and people from all life in our town wanted to share that and be part of that with us. And not only our community, but our family, our friends. People came from all over the world to celebrate William's life during the funeral. Again, it's just not something I'd ever been exposed to. I grew up in Manhattan. I'm a city kid, but and that type of community, that kind of sort of oneness, I'd never experienced before. And I believe it's all around us. Kind of what you were talking about earlier is, do we have it intrinsically within us to find that capacity to sort of find the resilience to move forward with our lives? I think it's the same thing with love. We all have that capacity. You just have to kind of unlock it. And for me, when the community rallied around us, it unlocked it for me in really in the first time it had ever been unlocked for me in my life. So it was really a special moment.
Yeah. I always sort of think of the loss of a child. It's kind of like when you've never been a parent before and you become a parent and you feel a love that you can't describe unless you've been a parent. And then the loss of your child, it kind of ignites that same intensity of love, but on a different level and in a different way. And it does, I think, open us up to different things. We all find different things from our loss. And I'm talking just child loss here. It could happen, I gather, in other losses, but I've had many other losses since Janaea, and none impacted me as much. Parents, her father, my ex-partner, my current husband is still alive and healthy. Yay. But, for me, and I, in all the years that I've been at this and met other bereaved parents and stuff, they just say there is no other loss like it. And that I really don't comment on that. Yes, no, it's because I do respect grief is grief for everyone, no matter what you've lost. But I just know it's kind of different if you've actually lost a child, and tragically more if you've lost more than one. But when we talk about, this idea of connecting to that intrinsic love, like you've never felt because they're now gone. And it stirs up all of these things, also negative. I think the negative emotions are extremely heightened. The guilt, everything we did wrong. We don't need to go there right now, but there's tons of stuff. And I did want to say one thing. I'm very, very happy for you that you had community. And I don't know if that's rare or not rare, but I know that there are deaths out there of children that do bring a whole community of people together. Suicide is not one of them. And we felt very ostracized and alone for many years. And I don't regret that because I get to see that side of it too. And so I didn't get to experience what you did. Community, getting together and, and all of that. So I can only imagine how supportive and comforting that had to have felt in the very early days. But nevertheless, it still, after all of that fades and goes away, then that's the intrinsic piece where you have to rely on what we're moving into next, the resilience of this human spirit. And what would you have to say about the resilience of the human spirit?
Um, Look, I think as a species, we are a resilient species, right? We wouldn't have evolved over thousands of years if we weren't. I think again, I think we're touching on this theme. It's intrinsic to us, but you have to find a way to unlock it. You have to find
Mm-hmm.
that thing that's going to sort of inspire you to find that resilience within you to do that. Um, for me, I recall a very specific moment when that happened. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's an anecdote that's in a book, but I'll share it now because
Sure.
it really is it sort of was a turning point for me.
Yeah.
It was one day, and I was in the deep state of depression and grief, and so much of that I was just basically I couldn't move. I was on my bed, just I just was incapable of doing anything, and honestly, it was the only way I found comfort, right? Just to be isolated in my bedroom, on my bed, not moving, and just shutting out the world.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I would try to move, I would try to move, but I just couldn't. The weight of everything was so much that I literally physically felt like I couldn't move. And my phone buzzed because someone had texted me, and it kind of activated my phone. And the picture that was on my phone was a picture of my middle son, Kai.
Mm-hmm.
And Kai, ever since he's born, had these huge eyes, and in that picture, you just see him with these huge eyes, kind of looking at me, kind of remind me, hey, don't forget me. I'm a little brother. Don't forget that I'm here too.
Yes.
And that kind of like woke me up because he was kind of my sort of reason for being, my reason to sort of pick myself off the mat and really try to get out of this funk, or just try to do whatever I could to be there for him. And that was a big driver for me. Just I couldn't let. Obviously, we'd lost William. I really didn't want it to sort of have any lasting damage on Kai. Obviously,
Yes.
this is always will be a part of his life, but I had to be there for him. So that was that, and that's where I sort of dug deep and found the resilience to really just try to find a way forward. And I continue to use him to this day as sort of someone as an inspiration for me to
Yeah.
find that. Yeah, I think resilience is realizing that at some point you got to move forward. As hard as that is, when you lose someone, you have to move forward. Doesn't mean you have to forget, but you have to figure out a way to move forward and live your life.
Yeah.
And the only way to that is to go through it, and that means enduring some pain, going through the pain. But that's the only way through. I wish I could tell people who are going through this that there's another way that you can circumvent to some way, but you can't. You got to go through the pain,
Yeah.
get there. And that Kai was, he was the reason he was my sort of inspiration to do that. So I guess for people who are, find something that you can cling on to and use as your inspiration and motivation to find that resilience.
Yes, exactly. It's very interesting because, I, like you, had my son as a motivator to get out of bed. I couldn't really take care of him, and he was 13 when his sister died. So fortunately, my husband stepped in and was able to do a lot of that stuff. But I like to say the time marches on, but unless you actually do something with yourself and your pain as you can, right? You're going to be in the same state you were years later. And I've seen people like that. And that was also a huge motivator for me, as seeing other bereaved parents. I attended a support group regularly for the first year. And not everyone was like that, but it wasn't a place where they wanted, and it wasn't the platform. And I never criticized support groups, but I was needing support that encouraged, like, any amount of moving forward, anything that would bring us hope and insight and feel better, rather than just a repeat of stories. And so I do just, in some of my work, caution people that, when they're looking for support, to, if you come away feeling uplifted and wonderful, and even make a good friend or two, that is the most amazing support in the beginning, community. But as the years go on, if you haven't done something to address what's really going on with the grief, the trauma, you're going to be stuck with a lot of problems years ahead. So any of the people that I have met in their first few years, and I started my work right away, right? It's interesting to see where you're going to evolve in years from now, Nick. It's just going to be so interesting, but I guarantee you're going to look back at this and your perspectives and things will change and grow as our lives grow. But it's the important thing is just making a commitment to not wanting to get stuck. The other big motivator for me was my daughter. And I just absolutely did not want to make her death and her choice to go, because it's a little different when there's an accident or an illness. We get to say, oh, well, that took them. But when they take their own life, it's you're still dealing with another level of stuff that's very hard to process, and it can take many, many years. So I didn't want that to be her legacy, my pain, my absolute, devolving into nothingness. And that kept me going for many, many years until more recently I am living for me. And so that is also a huge change in some of the work that I am doing now. Nevertheless, I just wanted to give that a shout out. I agree with you. The resilience is there, intrinsic to all of us as survivors. But we can survive in different ways. So surviving the way you're talking about and I'm talking about, we have to find ways to tap into that. And it only blossoms and grows, I guarantee everybody. Once you've choose that path, it only blossoms and grows, where we get to the point, if you're not already there, where you can, I don't want to say thank them for being in your life and grateful for the experience and all the lessons they've taught through their passing. That's a hard one, and one I've set myself up to, really embrace. That's just what I personally am striving for, and I'm almost there, I have to say. But hey, I'm 18 years in. It was something that really I have struggled with, and respect that. But they are our teachers. I want to go back to that really quickly. When you say that William was your teacher for many years before he left at the very tender age of 9, how was he your teacher?
Yeah. So I have a poem. I have a poem in my book about this, which I read at his when we buried his ashes at the cemetery. Mm-hmm. In at his birth, he taught me to live my truth, because I decided to, when he was born, to do a career that I was more passionate about, because I needed to role model for him. That you have to do things that you love, and so that was the first lesson he taught me. Mm-hmm. In life, he taught me the power or the beauty of imperfection. William struggled with anxiety, and he went to therapy, and I'd say right around the age of 8, he was really starting to come into his own, to the extent you can at that age. Mm-hmm. And he came up with a mantra. My wife takes the boys to a Unitarian church that had some great programming for kids, but the mantra he came up with was "Be yourself," right? And this is, a month or so shy of his 8th birthday, this little boy comes up with the mantra "Be yourself."
That's pretty profound, Nick.
Yeah, it's kind of, and people always called him an old soul, and that is a thinking that is well beyond his years at that point. We're all imperfect. We're all just here trying to figure out who we are, how we want to show up, and so that's what he taught me at the age of 7, 8, and 9, and then taught me the power of love, right? That for the love you have for a child is so visceral, and when there's a void in that love, it finds itself in other ways.
He's going to be your lifelong teacher. I mean, I can feel him, and I was blessed. We're not talking about that today, but I was blessed with my daughter visiting me from the afterlife within hours of her passing. But I had a metaphysical and spiritual practice for 23 years at the time she died. And so it was my mission for me to know there was an afterlife. And great, yes, I had read all the books and stuff, but experiencing it, I had other experiences, but none like this. And so I've been told, and so I'm passing it on to you, and we take it for what we want, that they will be our lifelong teachers. Whether she'll come back in my human life if she does, I hope I recognize her. But if not, I know she's there. And when I need her or want her to pop in, she does. So, but it's not regular, and I'm going to be upfront. It's not like all the time now, but maybe once a year or something. And I've let her go very peacefully to her place and whatever she's doing, wherever she is. And I feel very comforted by that now. You know, it's turned from a need to, hey, I just want to see if you can pop in, check in, let me know you're okay. I know she is, but you know what I'm saying? I'm just making a little bit light of this, but that's kind of another beautiful thing. If we can think about them as still with us, they will give us the signs and show us in different ways that they are here. I have zero doubt that William, I'll bet he helped write your book. I don't know, but you know, however you feel about that, but I really feel he's going to be hanging around you for quite some time.
Yeah, I would agree.
I want to ask you about your 5 key parenting tips that you've learned from William and have for others. I'm curious to know what those are, Nick.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that I learned about parenting, and I'll link it a little bit to what you're talking about having connections with people who have left us. You know, in the sort of, I'd say about 3 weeks to a month after William died, he visited me in a dream.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was looking for him just as I had been that day, and I found him, and we gave each other a big hug, and he said, "Well, I'm so happy to see you, but I can't stay."
Yeah.
And then he said, "That's a shame." And I don't quite know why he used this phraseology, but he said, "I'm as proud of you as you are of me." And so, as I reflected on that dream and that visit, you know, our kids, they want to be proud of their parents, right?
Yeah.
And we are their role models for what it means to be a human being, at least until they go off into the world, right? And so as parents, you know, it's a huge responsibility, right? Everything we do, everything we say is always under a microscope. Now, I'm not saying you have to overthink it, but be aware that what you do, what you say, how you respond to different situations is something that will always be looked at by your kids, and they'll take cues from that. So I think that's one of the sort of big lessons I learned.
Yeah.
There's more of a reminder, I would say. And I think the other piece is, you know, because our kids look to us, we have to model ways of being that will help them. We have to model a willingness to be vulnerable, right? To let them know when we make mistakes. Because if we don't model that, they won't do that. And then, you know, they'll have to learn it the hard way. So I think the more we can think about the types of people we want to raise, or the types of human beings we want to help raise, we have to be very cognizant of those behaviors that we model. The last thing I'll talk about is, you know, we all carry baggage from our own childhoods.
Yeah.
Right? I do believe there's generational trauma and baggage that gets passed on generation to generation. Mm-hmm. And it's our responsibility to break that cycle, right? I mean, so I love my family, love my parents, but they came from a different era. And there were definitely things that were modeled for me, which I don't want to model for my kids. But we have to make that choice. We have to get our own house in order so we can not precipitate the cycle. So I think that's another piece, is to really think about what are some things that maybe you bring from your own childhood, whatever narratives or limiting beliefs or being, because those will get transposed to your kids.
And you know, a couple things I just want to say about that. If you think your kids aren't picking up, it's just like you said, Nick, on the cues of what you're feeling, what you're thinking, certainly what you're saying to your spouse. If you're a single parent, maybe what you're saying to them. Anyway, they're way smarter than we give them credit for. And a lot of bereaved parents find that out about their kids when they've gone. It doesn't matter how they died and whatever age, but quite often we'll find out, whoa, I didn't know they knew that. And anyway, I've met so many parents that said that. Did the loss of William change your parenting style with your remaining 2 beautiful kids?
Yes. I mean, I've tried to be more intentional about catching myself when I get triggered, right? You know, because again, if I don't catch myself, that behavior will be exhibited, and then they'll interpret how we'll interpret it. And if I don't catch myself, and then I own it. I say, hey guys, sorry, I lost it, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
I just try to let them know that I made a mistake, and that's a human being, just like they are.
Yeah.
I remember one story, and this was when William was still alive. I had some parenting, mess up, and remember telling him, I said, William, you're the first 8-year-old I ever had to parent, so I'm going to make mistakes,
Yeah.
That's true for the other two, and again, I just think we have to own it when we make mistakes, because the handbooks, but we're dealing with the real thing. Things happen.
And I got news for everybody. If you're not parenting adult children yet, it doesn't change. Just letting you know. And certainly not with a son. And I love it, love it, love it, love it. But the loss of Janaea completely changed my parenting style. And I wanted to say two things about this for you, Nick, and for the audience, is that yes, we're going to get caught. So the Vaughn before being bereaved and the Vaughn after being bereaved, and a few years into, getting over the shock and trauma and finding some ground that felt safe to walk on. So I look at myself as just no more than a guardian of my son. I'm there to steer, to guide when he needs my help, and as age appropriate, model that behavior. But I understand they can be taken from us or choose to go from us at any time. And so one of the things that can be helpful, I think, as a bit of a practice, if you're finding yourself, I'm not speaking to you directly, Nick, I'm speaking in general terms here, going off the rails, so when I see parents, for example, yelling at their kids, or I don't know, just be in behavior that is super controlling, or just something where they're in conflict, I think to myself, do you know how lucky you are you have your kids? Like, do you even stop to think about what it would be like if you didn't have your child? And I'm not doubting the love of any parent in a healthy parent-child relationship, and maybe even in unhealthy ones, the love of a parent for their child, but understanding that they could be gone. It kind of can stop you in your tracks and go, wait a minute, and what legacy do I want to leave for my child? That's the other piece. Even if they're not going to be gone, it's like you're talking about, Nick. What do I want to model for that child? What do I, what kind of a parent do I want them to remember? Because they're going to remember the bad more than the good. And also the communication piece. And I love what you said about just owning it. Not all of us are going to be perfect. And my son is old enough now to kind of point out anything that might trigger him from the behavior patterns of his parents. Were biological parents to him, but my husband was not the biological parent to my daughter. So there was a little bit of a difference there. And he now, owning his own home, has the kids' room for us for what do you call that? An out, like when you have to go out for, 5 minutes, a sit out, whatever it's called. And it's kind of just a fun thing. So you can also turn this into a little bit of a fun thing. But really the point is that why I'm telling you this is that he doesn't like conflict. And he doesn't like conflict because it brings back all the crap and the memories from all the really bad years of grief and things like that. So we work very hard to be our, be our best. So that's another piece is in motivation and wanting to be our best for our remaining children, to model that, this vulnerability. We're not perfect, but hey, I really love you. I want to work through this at whatever age that communication is important. And I'm thinking parenting is very different now than it was 40 years ago, and even 30 years ago, and even 20 years ago. And so I'm thinking that there's much more room for this communication to take place, where maybe more traditionally we had models back in 2, 3, 4 decades ago where it was not quite as open. Like, we talk about a lot more socially and culturally now, and it can open the room for more conversations. Would you say, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I reflect on the way I was parented. you know, and I parent my kids. It's a totally different thing.
Yeah.
Our kids are a lot more privy, obviously, based on social media, the internet, to a lot, and so they can sniff it out a lot quicker than we could back in the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it requires, as parents, that you are more open, honest, and vulnerable with your kids, because they know.
They're going to see it on the internet if you don't have a discussion. And the other thing I just want to say for any parent out there, I wanted things for my daughter that she didn't want. And it was a key learning moment for me to not sort of imprint on my children what I thought was best for them and what I knew they were capable of doing, but they might not have had interest in it. So that was a huge change, a difference I took when my son got to university and things like that. And, so it's just we're guardians and have the discussion. You might think that they're, PhD material and they want to go into the trades or something, Okay. And so I wasn't a helicopter parent, but I was a very, I see your potential and I know you can, rise up to it. Let's do this, and, let's do that. And I stopped that. And maybe that was unique to me, but I don't think so.
I think we can have a tendency. Look, we want what's best for our kids, but we also, right, wrong, or indifferent, our kids become a part of our identities. It's nicer to say, well, my kid's a PhD versus a tradesman or tradesperson, right? So I do think you have to really check yourself when you say, is this really, I'm doing it because I'm in the best interest of my child, or is it because it's for me? And
yeah, exactly. And all due respect to trades, service people, somebody taught me not long ago that there are people who absolutely, she works in corporate, similar to what you do, Nick, in executive coaching for corporate. And we got into this, discussion about service work and versus the executive stream and all of that. And she was like, you know what? There are some people who absolutely love cooking or cleaning for other people or pumping gas or working at the jobs that we can have a tendency to prejudice them, show prejudice against because it isn't this high achievement. And I've remembered that and tried to honor it because I was doing kind of some of those jobs right after Janaea died because I didn't think I could do anything else. And that was just my experience and put me in that world for about a year. And it was very different and eye-opening. Anyway, so in whatever way, it's the communication piece I want to emphasize here. Talk to your kids because they do want to talk. And even if we think they don't, and listen to your kids, people, right, Nick? When you lose a child, you listen. I'm not saying you didn't listen to William, but I didn't maybe listen and hear the same thing she was saying, Janaea. I do with my son.
I think listening is critical. First of all, because again, back to the topic of role modeling, but we live in a world where we're always on our devices or distracted. And I think the more you can put a premium on listening and connecting with your child, the better.
Yeah. And I'm going to say this, even though it might be painful to hear. If anybody is watching this that has not lost a child, what we're just saying, if you listen, hear, communicate, connect, if anything does happen to your child, you will have peace of mind that there was nothing left unsaid or regrets. Yeah, that's going to be my little piece on that one. I did want to move a little bit here to you talk a bit in your work about how to approach challenges with an open mind and positivity. And if you would, Nick, just share, I think that's wonderful and great to do when you're not dealing with tragic loss and trauma and so on, terrible bereavement. Do you have any words of wisdom to apply that? I have no doubt you're applying those principles to your life, but for others to apply it to their own when they have gone through terrible loss, child loss, or other very difficult loss.
Absolutely. But first off, that's an aspiration, right? And what I mean by that is it's not going to come to you day one or year 2 or 3. It's that's the aspiration where you want to try to get to. Don't rush it. I think if you rush it, it's not real. So I think as I said before, the only way through grief is to go through it. You can't circumvent it. You can't speed it up. But there does come a point where, and I can't sort of particularly describe the specific time when it happened for me, but there does come a point where, you find the capacity to accept what happened, and as you accept what happened, you can take from it what it has to offer. I think any experience in life is an opportunity for growth and learning and personal evolution. You got to be ready to sort of see that. And again, it's not something you want to rush, and it will happen if you're open to it when it happens. I think about everything that happened with William, and I can't picture my life differently. It's a strange thing to sort of admit, but this is my life now. This happened. William died, and this is a life I share with my wife and my 2 other sons. I can't picture my life differently. My life is impacted by what happened in horrible ways, but also in a lot of positive ways. I just can't picture it differently. And it's a weird thing to say. Yeah, that's how it's kind of like I have a life where I had William in it, and then I had a life where William wasn't in it. And that's sort of how I've not bifurcated my life in these sort of two.
Yeah.
I have to have acceptance.
That's so interesting. So I wanted to say, so I was going to jump in on that point of acceptance. I think that acceptance of what has happened, the loss, the reality is key to being able to move forward in your grief and embrace a beautiful new life as a bereaved person. Because I also say you're never not going to be bereaved. We're bereaved. That's it. But that doesn't mean we have to be in grief the rest of our life. And there are those that can recover completely from grief. And then there are those that, may not entirely recover. And that's a personal thing, right? It's just a personal thing and unique to each of us and how we feel about whether or not we still are in grief about something, which is basically prolonged suffering more than anything, this grief. But to me, it's a bit of that sorrow. And anyway, I haven't got that one, for me personally, quite decided yet, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes along with that, accepting that your child wanted to leave the planet and actually killed themselves. That one's the tough one for me. But I did just want to say before I invite you to respond is, I don't think your idea is weird, that you can't picture your life any other way. That is sticking with me because I've never thought of my life like that. I've never thought about, wow. And in fact, I did spend quite a bit of, not a lot of time, but sometimes I would imagine what life would have been like if Janaea hadn't died. I certainly wouldn't be doing the work. I acknowledge I would not be who I am, and I wouldn't be doing the work I do today. So she gets full credit for her leaving the planet, pushing me in this direction. But, we had that sort of perfect life, log house, acreage, one boy, one girl, cat, dog, etc. And I often would say, it was like a Thomas Kincaid painting. Obviously, that wasn't what was really happening on the inside, but in my world, that's how I saw our lives. And so I'm not going to dwell on that today or talk about it today, but it was an interesting thing that you said, and I just like the audience to think about that you can't imagine your life any other way today. And I think that's just an incredibly impacting statement, Nick. And I'm super happy for you. And I mean that. I mean that with all my heart, because that definitely, well, I'll ask you, do you think that ties into your acceptance of William's passing, and that it had to happen that way, or just that it happened, I can't change it, it is what it is?
Yeah, it's a bit of both, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
both. I think I can't change it.
No.
Nothing
No.
like the bad in fact. Yeah. So there's nothing to do about it. It happens. So that's one element of it. But I've reflected a lot on what happened, on the events of the day.
Yeah.
And if I were to do that day over a million times, I wouldn't do one thing differently. Like literally, not a thing. There's nothing. What happened was a freak accident. There's a lot of little things that had to happen to put us on that, in those circumstances, for that to happen.
Yeah.
And sort of, I've the only conclusion I have is it was meant to be.
Yeah. I didn't want to say that because I don't, but I believe in that. I believe in that.
It freaks a lot of people out, but
I know.
the way I look at it, like, and that's where, yeah, he had a short but impactful life.
Yeah.
And that's where my drive to sort of make meaning and try to and write this book and create a legacy for him and some of the things he leaped in.
Yeah.
And that's where it all came from. So I think it's both. It's look, you have to accept it because there's one finality in this life, and that's death, at least.
Yes.
And so there's nothing you do about that. And if you're more spiritually inclined, then there is this notion that things happen for a reason.
Yes. And by the way, despite my 4-decade spiritual practice and huge interest in metaphysics and working with the angels and all of that, I still give equal respect to the human experience and what we go through physically, mentally, emotionally, because you have to, in my view, it's important. I should say it this way: it's important to blend the two, merge the two, not try and compartmentalize one and then live in this world. And there has to be a beautiful merging of the two if you're going to go that route. And this acceptance piece, you're being able to accept, and you describing what you just described, that there wasn't one thing you could have changed that day, right? Leads me to think that no, this had to happen. And if not that day, maybe another day, and that's when you get into all of this spiritual stuff. But sticking to the human experience, by you saying that, Nick, and other people thinking about, what if I just accepted that? There was nothing more I could do. Because do you know how many people, I would wager millions and millions, get stuck in the shoulda, woulda, coulda, didn't, all of those things. And that keeps us in this cycle for sometimes years and years and years, doubting ourselves, blaming ourselves, having tons of guilt, tons of regret. And all of that it breaks down relationships, and you can see it's just a rabbit hole into total destruction. So you're inspiring me, and you're inspiring me to, I don't have that cycle, but it was one on a very deeply personal level in my inner world of blaming myself. Because it's very difficult, and I'm speaking to audience members here watching this or listening to this. If you are stuck in that cycle of blame, guilt, and all those horrid things you feel about yourself because you did not save your child or other loved one, it's really, there comes a point where you just have to realize it's not worth the energy it's costing you and the effects it's probably having in all areas of your life to keep going down that road. It has happened. So what you're saying, it happened. It's almost like, the simplest thing is right in front of you. It happened, accept it, and then that can be your ground zero, the point from which to rebuild your life. Because you have to address all of those other things before you can start to really rebuild and embrace this beautiful life of fire within you.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you've perfected it. I would not do that. But I'm saying you get the idea, the principle, the mission, the purpose, the motivation to be in that place, to embrace everything else you've got in this new life. And that's what I'm honoring, hearing you say that. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I will say this, because I'm sure in you listening, the people listening to this show,
yeah,
different stages of where they are on their own journeys.
Yeah.
So it's taken a lot of work to get here. I don't want to minimize that, it's not, it takes work and it's a long road, and I'm almost 5 years in. And so if you're not there at day one, that's totally normal. It's a process. It's a journey. You'll get there when it's your time to get there.
Yeah.
I say that because, I think my mission and my goal is to try to inspire people, but I also want to say that it takes work, right? This doesn't happen.
It's lifelong. I will say it's lifelong work, because what happens, and you don't know this until you experience it, but the grief sneaks up on you, and years later, and there can be moments, anniversaries. And I've spoken before about, 10-year anniversary, and I had read about, 10 years, something, kind of triggers you at 10 years. And I was like, really? Because I read as many books as I could when Janaea died on, child loss, and there were really just hardly any. And most of them were written by dads. It was so interesting. I could only find one written by a woman at the time. And it was just so interesting. And to me, it didn't matter what age, how the child died. I just wanted to know, was I going to get through it? And what was going to happen in 20 years? And I know every situation is absolutely unique and different. And I really, really get that. But all I know for me, and I've talked to others, many others, and it can just sneak up on you. And, when these, anniversaries, triggers, I don't know, smells. Do you still go skiing?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I went skiing for the first time 3 years after the accident.
Wow. Yeah. How'd that feel? If you want to share.
Yeah, no, happy to share. I mean, it's interesting. I was definitely nervous because I just didn't know how it was going to hit me. I know if I have, I just didn't know, right? PTSD or whatever.
Yeah.
But I have to say, when I went skiing for the first time, I kind of realized it was actually just another powerful way to connect with Lynn, because skiing was something we held. It's a very deep bond for the two of us.
Okay. Yeah.
And so another way of honoring his life, and I do one small ski trip a year as a sort of a bit of a spiritual pilgrimage, a way of connecting with him. And actually, last year, I took my son Kai skiing for the first time because he wanted to. He go skiing, so I took him skiing, and
Were you terrified? I would have been. So I'm so curious.
I've skied my whole life, and I know that what happened to William really it was a totally fluke and freak thing that happened.
Yeah.
Happened again or pretty slim. And also I was very close to Kai every minute of the way down those
Yes. Yeah.
But I just wanted him to have a good experience, because one of the things my wife and I talked about is, like, we don't want this, Kai lost a brother. We don't want it to define who he is and the choices he makes.
Yeah.
So you have to honor. Yep, you can't. And he said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, Dad, he said, I want to ski with my family someday. I think it's cool, right? It's pretty cool that he was 10 at the time.
Yeah.
Cool that he has that sense of, like, I lost my brother, but I'm not gonna let it.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Thank you for sharing that, because when we're afraid of something, or we want to shelter our surviving children, which is a natural thing to do, but at some point you have to let them have their life too. And that kind of comes with being vulnerable to our fears, and at the same time guardian to them. But I'm not going to lie, I lived for years completely not overprotective of my son, but scared to death something was going to take him. And even now, I get just sometimes, where I'm like, geez, I haven't heard from him for 24 hours. He's 31.
And I get it. I mean, that happens to me with English. If I'm somewhere and I can't find him, I go right back to the day where I couldn't find William.
Yeah.
So that's always going to be.
That's the trauma, people. So understand that that's probably very natural. But at some point, and this is this whole idea that we can't control our kids, their lives, their futures. What worked for me is ultimately, because my husband said it was a super bad idea to put a tracker on my son's phone, and he doesn't live in the same city. And I'm just making a joke here, but you know what I mean? I'm just joking here. But it's to just really understand. It's to really understand I can't do a thing about it if something happens to any of my loved ones. So I practice instead, because I do live with PTSD, I practice instead. Here's what you will do if this happens, and don't implement it if and until you got to cross that bridge. And so but I just wanted to give a shout out for people traumatized and living with, extreme loss. I consider child loss extreme grief, complicated grief, trauma, all of those things. Just manage it. Catch yourself and go, okay, that's kind of all right. Maybe, I don't need to worry about that. But it's natural to worry. And I commend you for getting up on the hill, the mountain, skiing. But also I was going to say, by not going and not taking Kai and maybe Vodi one day, it does if that's what they really want to do, it kind of robs them of that experience. And apply that to anything in life for those of us that have surviving children. I never wanted my grief to, basically just ruin my son's life, nor the lives of my extended loved ones. And don't forget, shout out to extended family here who, while they might want us back the way we were, they want us to be happy and engaged with them as well, because while we're not talking about that today, certainly child loss, difficult loss can impact our relationships, not only within our immediate family, but with our extended family. And we're not maybe the ones to work through the grief with them, but just remembering that they want us to all be together and connect again too. And that, any kind of child loss can really destroy those relationships too. So I just want to give a shout out for that. All right, we are getting to the top of the hour, Nick. I just wanted to speak really briefly about vulnerability. Said we were going to talk about it, and we've talked about it, sort of had it weave in and out through the conversation. But is there anything else you want to share about being vulnerable? Because I think it's one of the hardest things that we can embrace in our bereavement and allow ourselves to go there. What does it mean for you to be vulnerable?
Yeah, so I think I've thought a lot about this. Well, obviously, I mean, I kind of consider my book as one big act of vulnerability for me, because it's not sort of the way I used to approach the world, or I was never that open before, and I feel like I've opened myself up a lot in the book. And I think it goes back to this theme of being yourself, right? Because I think when we're not vulnerable, we are masking a side of ourselves from the world. And when it has to do with grief, I mean, I'll talk first around grief and then more in general about the topic of vulnerability. But for grief, I think being vulnerable is being okay that you're doing grief in your own unique and special way. Because I think there was all the time when I was in the early stages of grief, and I probably read one too many grief books where I felt like I was doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And I think we just have to say, hey, I'm just doing it my way, and my way is okay for me. And so that to me is sort of that acceptance. That to me is vulnerability and grief, and just being okay with that's how I'm going to do it, and that's what worked for me. I think with respect to vulnerability, just outside of grief, one of the things I've thought a lot about is many of us spend a lot of energy protecting and being guarded, right, as opposed to being vulnerable.
Yes.
Being vulnerable is going to be this huge act and it's going to cause all kinds of negative repercussions. But think about how much energy we put into being guarded. It's a big waste of time and energy. And so why not just let the guard down and connect with others in a more meaningful way? Because as we talked about, it can, life, death it's a sort of razor thin line between the two. And you never know when it's your time, one of your loved ones' times. And so might as well just try to connect with as deeply and as powerfully with the people you're engaging with by being vulnerable. So that's kind of my take on vulnerability, both from the grief side and the non-grief side.
I agree with you, and I attribute all of our mask wearing to two things. So on the grief side, are more difficult types of loss, child loss, suicide, murder, all that kind of stuff. People are uncomfortable with it. Shut up. So it definitely culturally silences us. On the other side of it, just as human beings, we're so competitive. It's such a competitive world. Vulnerability means weakness. And if you're weak, you are not top of the pack. Next. Basically, if we express our vulnerability, we just don't have the ability to compete in the world. And I have found that over the 18 years. I never felt, though, like I was wearing a mask before Janaea died. I wasn't. I'm just me. And basically what you see is what you get with me. But it's when we have to be in those guarded situations and keep how we're really doing quiet. And it doesn't mean, I've said this before, it doesn't mean we're going to shout from the rooftops. It just means that it's that softness to ourselves and that authenticity that everybody hides. And yet that's the only true way of connection. And I'd like to see that change. We are not talking about your work on the corporate side, but you kind of do work in that with corporations, don't you?
Absolutely. And I've written blogs about it, articles about it, where, for leaders, I think there is this, if you want a role model, just like parents who role model for our kids, leaders role model for the people they lead. So the vulnerable leader is someone who is going to allow others to be themselves by being their own authentic selves. And I think one of the challenges with the word vulnerability is it gets blown. We think vulnerability is saying it doesn't mean you have to be an open book and you have to show up, whatever. It's just, as you said, it's just about showing your true nature, who you are, and the softer side of who you are. But it's an important thing for leaders, for people in general. I think we're in a time where I think there's more acceptance to it. So we just have to try to continue to push that agenda and try to get more people to buy into that. It can be a powerful leadership.
What a contribution. And boy, I'm not in corporate at all, but I worked in government for a number of years after my bereavement. And every year for 5, I added a work accommodation, and I got it. And I probably worked just as hard or harder than the full-timers. I ended up part-time, and they respected it. So I was very fortunate, but I had to be my own advocate for that and teach people about vulnerability through my experience. And so be brave, people, and you don't get what you don't ask for. And I love the work you're doing. So if anyone's interested in that side of you, I just want to move to your resources here, Nick. So even though this is more an episode on the grief piece, if anybody happens to be interested on the corporate side, they can go to your website. And essentially, what are the resources you're offering for, all of the things that you do?
Yeah, so my website is meetnickshaw.com. And that will offer a bit of my story. It offers details on my book. I also have a blog going there. So if you're interested in the book and interested in learning more about me, that's the place to go visit. The book is available on Amazon. I think, if you're interested in connecting with me, there's a link on there that you can send me an email or connect with me. So you can do it that way. Learn more about my perspectives on grief or learn more about my perspectives on leadership.
Yes, I did see it, and it's a beautiful website, Nick. I did just want to say that. So shout out anybody interested in Nick's book. We're going to have a link to that. And for those that are interested in Nick's take on, leadership in the corporate world and are interested in contacting him for any services on that side, please do so. Nick, in closing this, I did just want to thank you again very much for your vulnerability and sharing your story on this podcast. So, Nick, in closing this out, do you just want to take us out with your key takeaways so the audience can reflect on your words of wisdom?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the first takeaway is, we really have this one life to live. And so I think it's on us all to be more intentional with how we choose to live that life so we can ensure that our lives are purposeful and meaningful. my next takeaway is, life is a series of ups and downs, right? That's just reality. And for those of you who've lost a loved one, that just when things couldn't be going better, something kind of knocks you off the proverbial mountaintop. And the only way forward is through acceptance, right? And once you can get to that place of acceptance, you can find a way to learn from the experience that's in front of you, because I do believe our experiences are our greatest teachers. I think because we are here for just this brief moment, we all should find the courage and feel empowered to be our true authentic selves. And the key to that is to let our guard down and be vulnerable. A big part of that is shedding some of the limiting beliefs and narratives that we've carried throughout our lives. I think if you're feeling like those types of thoughts are dominating your mind space, then find resources to help you, think differently and live this life differently. And then lastly, I think when we are more open and more vulnerable, it allows, I think, the true potential of the human spirit to shine through, and with that comes love. So it all starts from within, and the more we can open ourselves up to that, the more we will have that in our lives.
Yeah, it all starts with love, and it all ends with love for those of us that are on that journey to find our inner peace and our holistic well-being. Thank you again, Nick, for being a guest on my show and sharing everything you've shared about your story, your wisdom, and what you've learned. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, take care.